Hi, I'm Femi Okay.
I'm Malika Bilal, and you're in The Stream. Today, we explore the impact of anti-abortion policies around the world, including Honduras' total ban on the procedure and a pro-abortion rights campaign in Northern Ireland.
But first, a look at the Trump administration's enforcement of the Global Gag Rule, otherwise known as the Mexico City policy, and a report by a women's health organization that says it is potentially a lethal threat. Have a look at this video explaining the policy and tweet us your thoughts.
Fact. The US hasn't funded abortions abroad since 1973 because of a law called the Helms Amendment. The Global Gag Rule goes much further. It prevents the federal government from funding organizations that provide access to or information about abortions. It doesn't matter if the money won't actually be spent on abortion services. Republican presidents since Ronald Reagan have imposed their own versions of the gag rule, but President Trump's is the most extreme. Instead of only targeting family planning groups, the ban applies to any organization, regardless of what services they provide. In other words, if a facility that provides cervical cancer screenings even mentions abortion, it may be forced to scale back or shut down for lack of US funding.
A recent report by the International Women's Health Coalition says that the Trump administration's reinstatement of the Mexico City policy is ultimately killing women. Joining the stream via Skype in New York to help us unpack the report, Françoise Girard serves as president of the International Women's Health Coalition. Hello, Françoise. The biggest headline from this report is what? What would you say really should be catching our attention around the world?
The report documents the impact of the Global Gag Rule in Kenya, South Africa, Nigeria, and Nepal, 4 countries that receive a lot of global health assistance from the United States government. And what we see are health services being reduced, women losing access to sexual and reproductive health information and services, including contraception, sexuality education, treatment for HIV, tuberculosis, and other services. So it's not only about limiting access to abortion, to safe abortion, it's actually damaging the provision of health services for women. And as a result, women are already dying as a result of the Global Gag Rule.
Dramatic findings there, Françoise, but I want to show you this tweet we got from Jamie. She says, I would encourage you to use the official name of the policy, Protecting Life and Global Health Assistance. Calling this the Global Gag Rule is a talking point of International Planned Parenthood and Marie Stopes, and is not unbiased reporting. She's talking to us at the stream there. And she goes on to say, other countries don't want the US forcing abortion policies on them. Talk to us about that view, that giving money from the United States to fund organizations that deal in women's health and women's health care, and some of that might be abortion, is, in her view, forcing US abortion policy on them.
It's rather the opposite. I think what the US is doing with the Global Gag Rule is contradicting the national policy of these governments. For example, South Africa, which liberalized its abortion laws in the 1990s after the liberation of the country, in fact has one of the most liberal abortion laws worldwide. And the Global Gag Rule is preventing health providers in that country from actually mentioning abortion, providing abortion, referring for services, abortion services, and even engaging in national debates on abortion policy and abortion law. And so that is contradicting the policies of South Africa. The same is true in Nepal, which liberalized its abortion law in 2002, and to a certain extent also in Kenya, where the constitution, the 2010 constitution, provides for a right to abortion when the health of the woman is in danger.
This is a policy and a political conversation, but also a story about real women and real women's issues. Tell us one story that's been uncovered by the report that you would like to share with our international audience.
So, for example, as a result of the Global Gag Rule, organizations have had to make the very difficult choice to either accept US funding and stop providing abortion care and information and referrals, or to accept U.S. funding and then turn women away when they show up at the clinic with an unwanted pregnancy. And that has meant that organizations have been put in a very difficult position of turning away clients. So in Kenya, for example, a group that is working very closely with young sex workers on HIV prevention decided to sign on to the Global Gag Rule because they didn't want to lose their HIV funding, but as a result have turned away young sex workers with unwanted pregnancies, and they've already documented a number of cases of deaths from unsafe abortion, including a young woman who had tried to insert knitting needles in her cervix to try to terminate her pregnancy. So it's already killing women, and we can document that.
Stories like that are difficult to hear, but thank you for sharing that. It's why we got this video comment from Carmen Barroso. She's the interim executive director at Global Doctors for Choice, and she talks about the risks she sees.
The Global Gag Rule is unconscionable because it drives women to unsafe services for abortion because they don't have access to safe services for abortion. And that's why we don't think women's lives and women's health should be subject to this terrible threat.
Our thanks to Carmen for that comment. We'll pause our discussion of the Global Gag Rule there and move to a campaign by pro-abortion rights activists in Northern Ireland, where both women and medical professionals can be prosecuted under anti-abortion legislation crafted in 1861. Here's what Dr. Damika Pereira had to say.
Northern Ireland's archaic abortion laws are really not for this century. These laws threaten women with criminal prosecution and jail sentences. They also risk clinicians who might be capable and willing to help these women with criminal prosecution and jail sentences. It doesn't make any sense for the rest of the United Kingdom to have one set of laws and for the women of Northern Ireland to suffer under its archaic abortion laws. The leaders of Northern Ireland and the leaders of the United Kingdom has to look at this from a public health perspective and from a perspective of women's rights, choice, and reproductive health freedom.
Last year's referendum in the neighboring Republic of Ireland, which legalized abortion, has given pro-abortion rights campaigners in Northern Ireland hope that change is possible. So how are activists pushing to bring the region in line with the rest of the UK? With us now from Belfast, Northern Ireland, Kelly O'Dowd is the co-chairwoman of Alliance for Choice, an organization advocating for the bodily autonomy of women, transgender men, and non-binary people. And Elizabeth Nelson is a writer and an activist for the Belfast Feminist Network. Welcome to both of you. I want to start with this view we got from a member of our community. Joe on Twitter says, I think the issue is finally being recognized in the rest of the UK because of things like Ireland's referendum, and sadly, because of the backward steps in some US states. I'd predict most people would support the law being changed from Westminster while there's no Northern Ireland executive. So help break this down for us, Elizabeth. The issue being recognized, what does he mean by that?
Well, what he means is that for a long time, abortion in Northern Ireland has been, and I suppose still continues to be, a very controversial issue. But we've seen a massive shift in public opinion over the last decade, I would say, to a point where most people in Northern Ireland, according to several opinion polls that have been conducted, would support abortion in Northern Ireland. It varies. Some people would only support it in cases of rape and fatal abnormality, whereas some people would support our campaign for decriminalization for abortion. But regardless, it's absolutely true to say that public opinion has shifted, and it now seems that people, or that rather that the politicians, are out of step with the public in Northern Ireland who want to see the human rights for women actually delivered.
Kelly, why is Northern Ireland still operating under a law that's over 150 years old?
Good evening. Yes, it's quite bizarre that we are, but in 1967, the rest of the UK had an Abortion Act, and that act was never extended to Northern Ireland. So we find ourselves in a very precarious situation that we are perceived as UK citizens. We pay the same UK taxes, but we're unable to access the same reproductive health care as the rest of the citizens in England and Wales. Today, the Department of Health actually released figures of women who travel from Northern Ireland. So today we found out that 1,053 women travelled in 2018 from their home in Northern Ireland to England and Wales to access access legal abortions there. And those figures have gone up, I think, nearly by 190, 192 since 2017. So that's the situation that we find ourselves in. We are exporting women to travel to access reproductive health care, which they should be able to access in Northern Ireland. So that's where we're at.
People online are upset about that, at least some of them. Helena says, I feel that politicians in the UK are handling this issue atrociously. Parties against the abortion laws in Northern Ireland are not making this enough of a priority. This is a human rights violation on our doorstep, and yet we hear so little about it. Can you understand that view that she's taking there, Elizabeth?
Yeah, there's absolutely a lot of anger.
And Kelly,
a lot of this
Kelly, I hear that you said as well. So Elizabeth, you go first, and Kelly, you come in after.
There's a lot of anger, I think, particularly because of the way that politics are set up at the minute in Westminster. After the general election in 2017, the Democratic Unionist Party, which is a Northern Ireland party, has actually been involved in propping up the Conservative government. And that has, without a doubt, led to their priorities for Northern Ireland being implemented, or rather things that they don't want to see happen in Northern Ireland being blocked. So they would be very much an anti-abortion party, very conservative, anti-equal marriage, all sorts of things like that. And because they are so integral to the survival of the Conservative government, it means we're facing an even harder uphill battle, because they have been able to block the government from interceding and delivering human rights, as is their responsibility. Human rights are not a devolved issue. It is absolutely the responsibility of the Westminster government to deliver human rights, of which abortion is one, and they are the ones who are abdicating their responsibility just to stay in power.
Kelly,
And just to add to our difficulty,
Sure.
that we have the spectre that is Brexit. So we've had debates, and a lot of the UK is moving towards decriminalisation. So 1967 Abortion Act is not decriminalisation, but there's a move in Westminster to say the 67 Act is no longer fit for purpose, and decriminalisation is where we should be at. And I think people are now more cognizant that Northern Ireland should not be left behind. But because of Brexit and because of the Tory chaos and leadership leadership competitions going on at the minute, Northern Ireland, and again our women, are fundamentally left behind. And again, we've had no Stormont Assembly for 2 years, but as Liz already said, this is a human rights issue. UN CEDAW has said that it's a violation of our human rights, and it should be dealt with in Westminster.
Again, Elizabeth and Kelly, just like in our earlier conversation, it's almost impossible to separate abortion policy from politics. People are noticing, and I'm going to share this headline with you from the Guardian newspaper. Abortion law in Northern Ireland is harsher than in Alabama. The state of Alabama now has the strictest abortion policy in the United States. Can you see how that compares to what you're dealing with in Northern Ireland, Kelly?
I mean, absolutely. Alliance for Choice actually wrote an open letter to Alabama to say, we share your pain, we share your solidarity, and to come up with a few ideas in terms of what you need to do to fight back. I mean, the silence and stigma that has surrounded abortion in Northern Ireland for the past 50 or 60 years. Remember, if we've exported 1,000 women this year, that's around an average of 50,000 women who have left Northern Ireland to access abortions, free, safe and legal abortions in the UK. So we wrote an open letter to Alabama, and it was interesting that people were able to comment on Alabama. Sure. And people probably from these aisles who didn't realise that the laws in Northern Ireland are more strict than they actually are in Alabama.
All right, Elizabeth, Kelly, there's more to talk about. We will do that in just a moment. But I also want to bring in another story from Honduras, where the group Human Rights Watch has documented the stories of women and girls who have experienced difficulties when trying to terminate a pregnancy. Here's one of those stories.
Mi hija tenía 16 años, tenía bastante fiebre, la lleva de emergencia al SEMA Santo Domingo y me dicen que ella tiene un embarazo de pocas semanas. Desde que ellos descubren que mi hija tiene una leucemia, ellos se lo callaron y no me lo dijeron. Nunca me dieron diagnóstico seguido. Todos los días decía, yo no aguanto los dolores, me estoy muriendo. Y durante 15 días mi hija nunca recibió el tratamiento de quimioterapia. Y siempre yo le decía, mira, yo quiero que interrumpan ese embarazo porque mi hija necesita tratamiento médico. Le daban calmantico para no perjudicar el embarazo. Pero yo me lo decía en mi cara. No le podemos dar nada porque ella está embarazada y porque el aborto es prohibido aquí en nuestro país.
Honduran law imposes prison sentences of up to 6 years on women, girls and medical professionals who induce abortions. That's according to Human Rights Watch. The government also bans emergency contraception, and since nearly 1 in 4 women in Honduras are victims of physical or sexual abuse by a partner, many are forced to terminate pregnancies in secret. Amanda Classing joins us now from Human Rights Watch. She is the acting co-director of the Women's Rights Division. Hello, Amanda. Do you want to make that connection between what is happening in Honduras regarding abortion and abortion policy and human rights?
Absolutely. What we know is when you ban abortion, you don't actually end abortion. You drive it underground. And when you drive it underground, women and girls are criminalized for trying to seek basic health care. And they take greater and greater risks to try to actually terminate the pregnancy. And doctors can't actually perform their duty of care, for fear of criminalizing themselves as well.
So we got this tweet from Kin Caboodle, that's their handle. They say, all an abortion ban does for women in Honduras is put them in danger. Danger from the potential side effects of seeking unsafe abortions, danger from pregnancy itself, and danger of violence against themselves and their families. And they go on to say, all of this can be summed up as, an abortion ban keeps women entombed in a society which does not recognize them as people. It covers up serious systemic problems by focusing on a symptom and forcing the victims to bear the burden of the problem. Can you talk to us about some of the difficulties that women are facing because of this law? Do you have specific examples?
So we have one woman in particular that we highlighted in our report. Her name, we called her Lorena, that's not her actual name. She didn't even know she was pregnant. And she was experiencing a lot of pain and bleeding, and she went into the hospital. And when she was in the hospital, they actually suspected that she had tried to induce an abortion, and she was suffering from a miscarriage. She received the care she needed, but she left the hospital in handcuffs. She was referred to the police system, and she's currently awaiting trial under house arrest. That's one example, but what we know is that women are alone and afraid and often trying to induce abortion themselves using pills, and are then afraid to seek care precisely because of what happened to Lorena and others. They're criminalized once they do.
What are women and activists within Honduras able to do to maybe change abortion policy and the law in Honduras right now?
It's a really difficult political environment in Honduras to talk about abortion. We talked to one woman who had tried to really bring the evangelical and Catholic Church and other leaders within the religious movements together to talk about and think about decriminalization of abortion. And she's received death threats just for trying to speak out. We also see women stepping up to try to provide access to information. There's actually a hotline that is staffed by volunteers that give women information on how they how they can safely terminate abortions.
We got this tweet from Liz in Spanish. Twitter has already translated it for us. In Honduras, abortion is still taboo, whether it is legalized or done in secret, because it is not considered a public health issue or women's rights. Rather, it's seen from the religious aspect. This is why there is no sex education. And of course, and I'll add to that, there's also abstinence is preached because there aren't contraceptives that are allowed. So how does this law compare to other Latin American countries?
So there are other Latin American countries where there are extreme bans against abortion as well. El Salvador is a great example, the Dominican Republic. But what we see different in Honduras is just the extreme stigma and taboo about talking about these issues. So if you look at Argentina, that also has, it's not as extreme, but it has abortion bans. Women are able to march in the streets and really talk about why abortion needs to be decriminalized and have conversations with politicians, and there be real debate about the issue. Honduras just isn't there yet. It is such a stigmatized issue. And so that means that women are really suffering in silence and in secret.
Amanda, I want to bring back our earlier guest, because we've been talking about abortion policy in different parts of the world. So Francoise and also Kelly and also Elizabeth. Kelly and Elizabeth are in Northern Ireland. Francoise was talking about the Mexico policy, or the Global Gag Rule, which impacts much of the developing world. Ladies, bringing you back together, because I'm wondering what you're saying on this show about different parts of the world. Is it resonating with each other? Amanda, you start.
Yeah, absolutely. This is a there's two global trends that we're seeing. One is that there are women that are braver and braver in speaking out and really advocating for change. There are doctors that are stepping forward and saying this is a public health issue. There are human rights activists stepping forward and saying this is a human rights issue. And there are some governments that are taking the steps to address it, like Ireland, like Chile. And then there's a second trend, one that is against women's choices, against women's rights, and against women's health. And you see that the Mexico City policy or the Global Gag Rule is a great example of that.
So Françoise is nodding, Kelly is nodding. Françoise, you go first.
Yes, absolutely. And what we're seeing is a global movement fighting women's rights, basically, because I think we shouldn't confuse the bans on abortion about being about abortion. What we see is that they're really about controlling women's sexuality, women's lives, and they're usually part of a much broader agenda that also includes cutting access to contraceptives, to sexuality education, and generally having a view of women as being wives and mothers first and foremost. So it's important to understand it in that context and not as an isolated issue.
I want to play a video comment. Kelly, I want to play a video comment from Idem Barbara Natumi from Decolonize Contraception and Abortion Rights. And she's talking about Ireland, but I think that this can be extrapolated to other places. So have a listen to what she said.
Abortion is about reproductive health care. Jail sentences for medical staff who help individuals procure abortion seeks to destroy and erode the patient and doctor relationship, further legitimizing the idea that individuals cannot make the choice for themselves in what is a safe medical procedure.
So Elizabeth, that means you jumping in. For you, of course, she's talking about Northern Ireland here, but this is something we're also seeing or potentially could see in the US because all of these bills and these laws make it difficult for doctors then to step outside of those boundaries.
Absolutely, and it's rather cynical and ironic in a way that so much of the rhetoric that anti-abortion activists employ is around morality, when really what they're doing is immoral. When they're divorcing doctors from their patients, from the duty of care that they have, when they're forcing doctors to not give women the care that they need and putting them in situations where their lives and their health is at risk, that in itself is immoral. But I also want to just comment quickly on what Françoise said about the fact that abortion is just one small part of what is happening to women. And it absolutely is about control. It's about taking freedom away, because that's what abortion is for women who need it. It's freedom. It's freedom to continue living their lives. It's freedom to access education, to go to work, to do with their lives what they choose to do. And that's why we start to talk about something that is reproductive justice instead of human rights, which is a very powerful tool talking about abortion. But when we put it into a reproductive justice framework, we're able to understand that it's not just about abortion. It's about access to contraception. It's about the right to parent a child that you already have in a safe and healthy community. It's a holistic look at women's lives, at the lives of anyone who can become pregnant. And there's no accident that this is happening on a global scale. It's very much deliberate.
Kelly, I don't need to tell you, because you're sitting there in Northern Ireland, where the impact of the Catholic Church, the impact of societal norms, it's a very tricky thing. This is a very sensitive topic to even bring up and to campaign about. When people talk to you about what about children's lives, what about babies' lives, how do you discuss that with them? Because you have to come together in order for policy to be made that's good policy for every woman.
Absolutely. I mean, Northern Ireland is a very morally conservative society. So human rights arguments, bodily autonomy arguments, feminist arguments don't necessarily sit very well with the general public. So what we find is that talking about women's lived experiences, talking about why they need to access abortion, why they find themselves with crisis pregnancies, and why they need to be able to access this reproductive health care. So when we put the woman at the centre of the debates and the discussions, everybody may not agree with abortion, but it's not about everybody agreeing. It's about, it may not be a choice for me, but I will absolutely not stand in the way of any woman who needs to access an abortion. And also, we would not criminalise her. I mean, what we're seeing is women's bodies, again, are political battlegrounds, and the price of equality is constant vigilance. And this is what we're seeing as well. Just because we have abortion rights in some countries does not necessarily mean that we hold on to them. So the price of equality is constant vigilance.
Kelly O'Dowd, Elizabeth Nelson, Amanda Classing, Françoise Girard, really joining those dots between politics and abortion policy in many places around the world. Malika.
Well, and with 2 comments from YouTube Live here, Lydia says, abortion bans are not about controlling women. How self-centered do you have to be to think that? And Idris on the other side says, illegal abortions mean abortions in secret and in worse conditions, which endangers women.
Thank you, guests, for joining us. Thank you for watching. Malika and I will see you next time. Take care.